I know how to read a room. Always have. 38 years working in commercial property management teaches you to notice the things people try not to show you, the micro-expression before a tenant lies about late rent, the way a business partner shifts their weight when they're about to pull out of a deal. You learn to catalog small things. File them away. Say nothing. That's what I did the night my wife got dressed for her dinner. She came out of the ensuite in the blue wrap dress, the one I'd bought her for our anniversary 3 years back. She smelled like the perfume she kept on the high shelf. The expensive one, she said, was for special occasions. I was sitting in the armchair by the window with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. I watched her clip on her earrings in the hallway mirror. She didn't look at me. Not once. I said, "You look nice." She said, "Thanks." That was it. She picked up her handbag, the tan leather one, and left. I sat in that armchair for a long time after the headlights swept across the ceiling and the sound of the car disappeared down the street. The house was very quiet. Our dog, an old border collie named Patch, came and rested his chin on my knee. I scratched his ear. Outside, the neighbor's sprinkler ticked on and off in the dark. I was 61 years old, and I had no idea how long this had been happening. My name is Walter Hendricks. I lived in a suburb of Brisbane, in a house my wife Elaine and I had bought together 29 years ago, when the street was full of young families, and the jacaranda out front was barely taller than our fence. We'd raised 2 kids in that house. Our son Miles was 32 now, living in Perth with his partner. Our daughter Bridget was 29, a midwife at the Royal in Hobart. Good kids, both of them. They'd grown up with parents who cooked dinner together on weeknights and drove them to sport on Saturdays, and never, as far as they knew, had a single serious problem. That was the version of us I'd believed in too, right up until about 4 months before that night. It started, as these things often do, with something small. I came home early from a site inspection in January. A development I'd been managing out at Redcliffe had hit a snag with council, and the meeting wrapped up faster than expected. So I was back at the house by 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Elaine's car was in the driveway, which was unusual. She worked part-time at a dental reception in Chermside, Tuesdays, until 5. I didn't think much of it. Maybe she'd taken the afternoon off. But when I came through the side gate to drop my work bag in the laundry, I heard her voice through the kitchen window. She was on the phone. The window was open, and the security screen was there between us, so she couldn't see me, but I could hear her clearly. She wasn't talking about anything obvious. Nothing that would hold up as evidence of anything in particular. She was laughing, that low, private laugh I hadn't heard her use in years, and she was saying things like, I know, stop it. And I can't just disappear on a Tuesday. And because he gets home at 6, that's why." She said he the way you say it when the person has no name in the conversation, because both of you already know who you're talking about. I stood by the laundry door for about 40 seconds. Then I went back around the front, opened the front door loudly, called out I'm home, got out early like a normal person, and went to the kitchen. She was standing at the bench, phone face down, already smiling. "That was quick," she said. "Council blokes folded early," I said. "I'll make coffee." I made coffee. We talked about whether we needed to replace the hot water system. She showed me a photo on her phone of Bridget's new kitten. Everything was normal. Everything was absolutely normal. But I'd filed it away. After that, I started paying attention the way I used to pay attention at work. Quietly, without showing my hand. I wasn't erratic about it. I didn't go through her phone while she slept or follow her to the shops. I just watched. I noticed patterns. She started going to the gym 3 mornings a week. She'd never been much of a gym person. When I asked about it, she showed me the app on her phone, a proper membership, classes booked in advance. Looked legitimate. But she'd come home from the gym freshly showered, and I'd noticed the gym bag was dry. Hair wet from a shower, sure. But the bag, No damp towel. No sweaty workout clothes. I noticed she had a second email account. I didn't snoop into it. I saw it pop up as a notification when she accidentally left her tablet unlocked on the kitchen bench. A Gmail address I didn't recognize, made with a name I'd never heard her use. I noticed that in February, March, and into April, almost exactly $800 a month was being transferred out of our joint everyday account into her personal savings account. That in itself wasn't unusual. She'd always kept a separate savings account for her own spending. We'd agreed on that from the start. But the amount had roughly doubled from what it used to be. I checked back through statements. The increase started in September the previous year. 7 months. The change had been happening for 7 months before I noticed. I didn't say anything. I kept going to work. I kept cooking dinner. I kept walking. Patch around the block every evening and asking how her day was. On the outside, Walter Hendricks was a man going about his life. On the inside, I was building a picture. The man's name, I found this out the slow way, through patience and observation, was Curtis Webb. He worked in commercial real estate, which I found bitterly funny. She'd met him through a property expo she'd attended in October with her boss, who was apparently trying to diversify into investment properties. Curtis Webb was 47 years old. He lived in a townhouse in Newstead with his wife Joanna and their teenage son. I found this out because I am, at my core, a practical man. Once I knew enough to suspect, I knew enough to verify. I'm not proud of everything I did to confirm what I suspected, I'll be honest about that, but I needed to know what I was dealing with before I decided what to do about it. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Trudy, who'd been recommended to me quietly by a solicitor colleague years ago in a completely different context. She was professional, discreet, and thorough. Within 3 weeks, she handed me a folder. I sat in my car outside her office on Wickham Terrace on a Wednesday afternoon, and I opened that folder. I read through it once, carefully, the way I'd read through a property contract looking for problematic clauses. Then I closed it and put it on the passenger seat and drove home. I didn't cry. I want to say that I handled it with great stoic dignity. But the truth is, I just didn't cry. I was something past the crying point. I'd been preparing for this moment for weeks, and the preparation had used up whatever would have become tears. What I felt was more like the sensation of a long calculation finally reaching its answer. Not a good answer, but an answer. Patch was at the door when I got home. Elaine was at her Pilates class, genuine this time, I happened to know. I fed the dog and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the folder again. And I thought about my kids. I thought about Miles and Bridget growing up in this house. I thought about the jacaranda out front that was now enormous, that dropped purple flowers on the front path every spring, and that Elaine and I had a running argument about because she wanted to have it lopped, and I never did. I thought, whatever I do next, I am going to do it without blowing this family apart any more than it already has to be. The next morning I called a family lawyer. Her name was Helen Marsh, a senior partner at a firm in the city I dealt with professionally years before. I explained the situation. She was calm and efficient and told me exactly what I needed to know. I made an appointment for the following week. Elaine came home that evening with takeaway Thai and a bottle of wine, and we watched television, and she fell asleep on the sofa with her feet tucked under her like she'd been doing for 29 years. And I sat next to her and watched a nature documentary about the barrier reef and thought, I know everything, and you have no idea that I know. It's a strange place to be, that. I don't recommend it. The dinner she dressed up for in the blue dress was in late April, a Friday. She'd told me she was going out with her friend Robin from her old job. They caught up a few times a year. Always had. I had no particular reason to doubt the story except that I doubted everything now, and the perfume was from the high shelf, and the dress was the anniversary dress. She was back by 11. I was already in bed, technically asleep. I heard her moving around the bathroom, the soft sounds of someone trying not to wake their husband. I lay still and breathed evenly. In the morning, we had eggs on toast, and she told me Robin was going to New Zealand for a month, and it had been a good catch-up. I said, "That's nice. Tell her to have a great trip." 2 days later, on the Sunday, I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I thought about it overnight and decided it was the right thing. I called Joanna Webb. I want to explain why. It wasn't about causing damage. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't spite. But I'd been sitting on information that affected another person. A woman I'd never met, who was almost certainly in the same position I'd been in for most of the past 7 months. She deserved to know. Full stop. If someone had called me with this information, I would have wanted to receive that call, no matter how awful it was. Basic human decency, in my view, required me to make it. I found her number through the business listing for her husband's agency. She worked there too, in the admin side of things. I called on a Sunday afternoon when I calculated Curtis was likely to be out. She answered on the third ring. I told her who I was. I told her what I knew. I told her I had documentation. I kept my voice level, and I spoke slowly and clearly. There was a long silence on her end, and then she said quietly, "How long?" I said, "From what I can establish, since around October. 7 months." Another silence. Then she said, "Thank you for telling me." She said it like someone receiving a medical result. Steady and demolished at once. "I'm sorry," I said. "I genuinely am," she said. "So am I." That was the whole conversation. I hung up and sat in the backyard for a while. The jacaranda in the front was starting to bud early this year, with all the rain we'd had. Patch lay in the patch of afternoon sun on the paving and squinted at me. That week I met with Helen Marsh again and we went over the timeline for filing. Everything was in order. The folder from Trudy, the bank statements I'd carefully copied, notes on dates and observations. Helen said I'd done her job for her, which I took as a professional compliment. I want to tell you about the day Elaine found out. Not because there was drama or a confrontation that felt like a television finale. There wasn't. That's not how our 31 years of marriage ended. I came home from work on a Thursday. Normal time. I'd asked Helen to send the formal notification to Elaine's address. That day I'd timed it deliberately, so I'd be there when she received it. It arrived in her email at 4:47 p.m. I know because I was in the study at my desk and I could hear her at the kitchen table and I heard her go very still. She came to the study doorway. She was holding her phone and she looked at me and I looked at her and neither of us said anything for a moment. Then she said, "Walter." I said, "I know, love. I've known for a while." She started to say something. I could see her trying to find the angle, the explanation, the version that might salvage something. I watched her face move through several possibilities and discard each one. "The lawyer will be in touch," I said. "I want this to be as fair as it can be, for both of us and for the kids. But I need you to understand, I'm not negotiating on the house." She went back to the kitchen. I heard her crying, quietly, for a long time. I sat at my desk and I thought about all the months of saying nothing, of watching and cataloging and preparing. And I thought, it's done now. Whatever comes next, the hardest part is done. The months that followed were hard in the ways. Divorce is always hard, and not hard in some of the ways I'd expected. Elaine and I, to our credit, did not go to war. Helen Marsh and Elaine's solicitor, a man named Percival Oakes who turned out to be perfectly decent, managed a settlement without the thing turning into a demolition derby. We agreed on the house. She released her share to me in exchange for a portion of my superannuation and the investment property we'd bought in Ipswich 8 years earlier. She moved into a rental in Ashgrove. Curtis Webb's marriage, I heard through a mutual acquaintance later that year, did not survive either. Joanna had filed. I felt sorry for their son, who was 17, and had done nothing to deserve the year he was having. I told Miles and Bridget together, on a video call, in June. That was the hardest single conversation of my life. Miles went quiet in the way he goes quiet when he's trying not to show that he's upset. Bridget cried straightforwardly and asked if I was okay, and I told her I was getting there. I told them both that their mother and I would always love them, and that what had happened was between us as adults and had nothing to do with them. I told them their mum needed them right now, and that I was fine, and that they should call her. Miles called me back the next day, and we talked for an hour. He didn't ask for the full story. He just asked, "Did you know for a while before you did anything?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "That sounds like you." And I said, Yeah, it does." The jacaranda bloomed spectacularly that spring. I didn't have it lopped. I raked the purple flowers off the front path every few days, and I thought, this is my house. I built a life in this house. It's still standing. Patch died in August, 2 months after the divorce was finalized. He was 14. I buried him under the rosemary bush in the backyard, which is where he always used to dig. I cried at that, more than I'd cried at anything else that year, if I'm honest. Grief lands where it lands. By the time spring came around properly, I was finding my feet. I'd joined a bushwalking club, something I'd wanted to do for years and never got around to. A group of us, mostly retired or semi-retired, went out most Sundays to somewhere in the scenic rim or up toward the Sunshine Coast hinterland. Good people. I'm not a man who makes friends easily. At least not quickly. But I'd made a few genuine ones by the end of that year. My daughter Bridget came up from Hobart in October. We spent a long weekend together, drove down to the Gold Coast hinterland, walked through the rainforest, ate good food, talked about everything and nothing. She's a remarkable young woman. I told her that, which I probably don't say enough. One Sunday in late November, I was sitting on a rock at the top of Mount Barney with a thermos of coffee and a view that made you feel like Queensland had been made just for that moment. The sky was enormous. The valley below was green and gold and impossibly still. I thought about what I'd learned that year, not about my marriage, or about the particular person my wife had turned out to be underneath the surface I'd known, but about myself. About the kind of man I was when things went badly. I'd thought I'd fall apart. I hadn't. There's something I've come to believe, and I want to say it plainly, because I think it matters. The worst thing you can do when something is broken is to pretend it isn't. Not to yourself. You can be quiet about it to the world sometimes, that's wisdom. But if you stop being honest with yourself, stop looking clearly at what's in front of you, you lose the only solid ground you have. I'm 62 now. I live alone in a house full of things built over 31 years and a jacaranda that drops purple flowers on my front path every spring. I walk in the bush on Sundays. I talk to my kids every week. I've learned that silence, when chosen deliberately, is not the same as acceptance, and that the people who stay quiet while they do what needs to be done are often the people who come through. I also want to say this, because I've had time to think about it clearly. If you ever find yourself in the position Joanna Webb was in, married to someone whose second life you don't know about, you deserve to know. You deserve that phone call. Being faithful to someone's comfort at the expense of their right to the truth is not kindness. It's cowardice, dressed up as consideration. And if you're ever the person making that call, the one with the information that will change someone's life, make it. It's one of the harder things you'll do, but decency requires it. Patch used to wait by the gate every day until I came home. Every single day, 14 years, without ever once deciding it wasn't worth it. I think about that sometimes. When I come up the front path through the jacaranda flowers, it turns out consistency is its own kind of love. I've had a lot of time to think about what that year cost me and what it gave me. Those two things aren't as separate as you'd expect. What it cost is obvious. 31 years. A version of my life I'd believed in completely. The particular quiet of a house where two people have lived long enough that they stop noticing each other, which turns out to be both the problem and, in its own strange way, one of the things I miss. Patch is gone. The marriage is gone. A lot of the certainty I used to carry around without even knowing I was carrying it, that's gone too. But here's what I've come to understand. Sitting on rocks at the top of mountains with a thermos of coffee and more time to think than I've ever had in my life. The cost and the giving are the same thing, just viewed from different angles. When I stood by that laundry window and heard my wife's voice and chose deliberately, consciously to say nothing and go inside and make coffee and act normal, I made a decision about the kind of man I was going to be through what was coming. That decision shaped everything that followed. Not the betrayal, not what she did. My decision. That's the part I actually had control over. And I think that's worth sitting with for a moment. We talk a lot about being wronged, about what people do to us. And yes, what happened was wrong. I won't dress that up, but I've noticed that the people who come through hard things with their dignity intact are rarely the ones who made the biggest scene. They're the ones who got quiet and got clear and then got moving. That's not weakness. It's not denial. It's a particular kind of intelligence that only activates when things are genuinely bad. I called Joanna because it was the right thing to do. Full stop. Not because it helped me. Not because it was strategic. It wasn't, really. It was uncomfortable and sad. And she deserved better than that phone call, even while she needed it. But I think the moments that define your character are exactly those moments when doing the right thing costs you something and you do it anyway. That call cost me something. I'm glad I made it. My son Miles said something to me the day after I told the kids. He said, "That sounds like you." He meant the waiting, the watching, the choosing to act from a position of preparation rather than reaction. I'd never thought of that as a particular quality before. It was just how I moved through the world. But I think he was right, and I think it mattered. Bridget needed to know her father wasn't destroyed. Miles needed to know I'd handled it with some dignity. I needed to be able to look at both of them without regret about how I'd behaved. The choices you make when everything is falling apart are the ones that stay with you. They become the story you tell yourself about who you are. Make them count.